Saturday, 24 September 2022. I've been in jail on the YouTube for the past week, and I can see that the views on the channel is taking a dive, but that's how it works. I want to talk about this story that is running that Putin is now in deep trouble, and then they make all sorts of references to the so-called conscription, or mobilization, or what. Here's a few facts that you just need to take into consideration. In Russia, when you go to the army, the military, they have a conscription plan, and they do conscript every year a few 100,000 people, and these people go into the army and they sign contracts, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, that type of thing. But then once that guy is done with his military service, he's automatically placed on a reservist list. And for those of you that don't know, the reservist list in Russia is roughly about 25 million people. Now think about that. That is 25 million people that has got actual, real military training, and many of them are well trained. Many of their special forces, when they leave the military service, they join the Wagner group, and that is basically also a professional army on its own. And they are good, because most of those guys in there, the cream of the crop. But let's come back to this mobilization. So there's a pool of 25 million reservists. Putin has called up 300,000 of those. That's about 1%. Think about that. And the West needs to think about that. 1%. And there's clear stipulations. No students, and they want people that have been trained already. People with military experience, and there's an age limit on that of 35. And then they are looking for officers and specialists, and for them the age ceiling is 55. Now the Western media is making a big song and dance about Putin is in trouble and his back is against the wall and all type of shit like that. That's bullshit. And then they make stories about the people trying to flee the conscription and the mobilization and that. Fact of the matter is, in the first day, thousands of volunteers pitched up at those military points because they want to fight. And they are turned away because they were not conscripted and they don't have military experience. So don't let the Western media bullshit you. The reality is, the Russian war machine is a monster. And if NATO should get involved directly with Russia, NATO will lose and Europe will be ashes. But you get that Stoltenberg talking a lot of cuck and big stories, but he's a bureaucrat apparently. He's got no say in NATO. It's the military commission or committee in NATO that makes the decisions. And they have come out strongly this week, saying they are not in a fight with Russia. They don't want a war with Russia. But let's stick to the mobilization and just get those facts right. So, Putin has called up 1% out of his pool of reservists, and that's 300,000. Now, 300,000 soldiers, that's a more of an army. Nobody in Europe has the capabilities to do that. But what is now going to happen with the referendums running in the Donbass region, and in Kherson, and in Zaporizhia, if those referendums vote yes for incorporation into the Russian Federation, the reality in the Ukraine is that all of a sudden you won't be talking about a special military operation anymore, because then that Donbass border is Russia's border. And if Ukraine attacks the cities and the villages inside that border, it is an attack on Russia. And then the politicians don't have much say in the response, because the Russian army will take over control of fighting the invaders and fighting that war. And we will see a change. It will be definitely a change. These 300,000 men that are now being mobilized, they will now first go through the medical checkups to see if they're medically fit, and then they will be taken to their training locations where they will be freshened up and reintroduced to their weapons and their systems that they must operate with, and then they will have their training on those systems. And there is people that are in the know estimate that within 2.5 to 3 months that 300,000 people will be ready for deployment. Now, what will happen? At this point in time, in the Donbass is roughly 200,000 Russian soldiers. But the Russian soldiers, of that 200,000, less than 50,000 is actively fighting. The other 150,000 are involved in the logistics and in protecting the areas that has been taken out of control from the Ukraine forces. So 150,000 of them, and they are well-trained professionals, are basically tied up in, let's call it, administrative duties. And then you have the Donbass militia, the LPR and DPR militia, and you've got the Chechens there. Now at this point in time, the militia and the Chechens are doing most of the work, and include the Wagner group. But with this thing that is now happening with the mobilization, that 150,000 Russian soldiers that are doing basically administrative work and logistical work will all of a sudden be available to be pushed to the front. And I think that is when we will see the Russians taking the war to the Ukrainians on the way, according to the Russian doctrine. They're going to hit them hard with armor, tanks, artillery, and Air Force. Up to now, the Russian Air Forces play a small role in the Donbass and in Ukraine. But it is my prediction that we're going to see a lot of Air Force activity. The Russians has moved something like 1,000 planes from their bases closer to the Ukraine borders the past 2-3 weeks. So they have them on standby, plus it seems that this Iranian drones is really good. And apparently the Russians has bought planes full of them. They are a nightmare for the Ukrainians. I've heard that one of the types of drones that they have, that the Iranians have, is a small drone, and the damn thing flies slowly, and it flies very low. It flies so low that the anti-aircraft detection systems that the Ukrainians have don't pick them up. And these things are apparently very clever. If they have been set onto a mission to take out, say, a rocket launcher, and they don't reach the rocket launcher while it's firing, and that rocket launcher moves away, this damn drone tracks it like a dog and follows it and then wipe it out. But that is the way modern warfare is going to work. The Americans rely heavily on their massive fleet. Those things are floating coffins. The modern missile systems makes a ship really a floating coffin. But this story is about the fact that Russia is in deep shit and all of that, and there's people that want to flee out of the country. I listened to a Russian MP talking last night, and he said most of those guys that are lining up there at the airports now, they wanted to get out, are soy boys in any case. And it's better for them to go, but this is now their opportunity to become men. And then there's stories about the Russians are breaking bones and things of that, like that. Just a note on that, in Russia, if you are called up and you arrive there with a broken bone, be it in your arm or your leg or a hand or whatever, and that doctor look at that, and that's a freshly inflicted break, you are facing 10 years in jail. So you must make a choice. Break your arm or go to jail. Break your arm and go to jail. Or just go through the medical and see if you fit. And then come back to it. If you are a student, you're not called up. If you are the sole provider for dependents, they don't call you up. If you are in a key position in a business, they don't call you up. But the Western press are feeding us shit, and unfortunately, the bulk of the sheep will sit there and swallow it up. So, on this Saturday morning, don't bluff yourself and think Russia is in shit. The West is in shit. And we've got a problem now in the Ukraine, and that is that all the original Ukraine army equipment has been destroyed. The Ukraine military are now basically running 100% on NATO weapons. And there's a lot of stories. Many of those weapon systems are being managed by so-called contractors. And the reality is that it is now basically Russia against NATO. And you can argue about it as much as you want, but that's the facts. So, in the end, we are sitting with a situation that if this referendum results is in the favor of Russia, and Russia takes those areas into the Russian Federation, the fight is no longer on Ukraine soil. The fight will be on Russian soil. And whoever are on the side of Ukraine and in the vehicles and in the uniforms must understand they will be facing the Russian war machine, and that Russian war machine, the sole purpose is to protect Mother Russia. So on that happy note, let's hope sanity prevails, because if NATO escalates in the Ukraine, I am afraid we are going to see a lot of flames and ashes in Europe.